Trigger warning that this episode contains discussions of our sister's suicide and our aunt's suicide, which may be distressing to some listeners. Hey, Robin.
Hello.
Sis, also known as Sis, or Hun. That's what I called you growing up. So today we're talking, we're going to segue into talking about women and entrepreneurialism and motherhood. And is entrepreneurialism a word? Entrepreneur. Anyway, and how we crafted our own path, had to fight for it, how you and I initially aligned in this beautiful work of breaking family patterns along with our older sister, Tanya. And so we're going to get into some of the blocks and resistance that we've had to work through personally just to claim our path and to listen to the call of our soul and create wealth and all of those things that were so stigmatized. I feel like, for most of our lives and still is there that we have to work through. But I want to start with our story, our why.
Yeah.
And just to set this up, a lot of my listeners know that I have lost a sister to mental illness. We have. The very, very first episode that I ever did on this podcast was in February of 2019, where you and Tanya and I talked about some of our family patterns of mental illness, some of the deeper stories and connection to why we do what we do and where our hearts are at with this work and helping humanity and lifting familial patterns of mental illness. But I want to start with Shauna's death, our sister Shauna. And, as I look at like the arc of my life and from a purpose standpoint, I can see that from day one, my soul had this knowing that I was going to be moving into this mind body science work, psychology, understanding mental illness from a higher perspective, let's just say, and from a darker perspective. And so getting my psych degree and moving in the direction of thinking that that was going to be my profession, that I was going to be a psychotherapist and just moving in that direction. But when Shauna took her life, and just for some context around that, because everyone gets curious around how she did that, she was a mother of 5. She was in recovery from an addiction to opioids. She was diagnosed bipolar, and we later found out after her death through talking to her psychologist or her therapist that she was also diagnosed schizophrenic. And so there were a lot of complexities to her path. She also had heart surgery when she was 5. I was 7. She had severe scoliosis. And as a teenager, she had to have a full spinal fusion where they opened up her entire spine and fused rods on either side of her spinal column. So she just had a lot of physical and mental challenges in her life, her whole life. And so you came along a little later. So Tanya and Shauna and I are all like, mom had us in like 3.5 years or something crazy like that. And you came along when I was almost 12.
Yep.
Yeah. But you actually spent a lot of time with Shauna too, just like I did, because she was right there and she was home and our family is really close. Wouldn't you say our family, like our siblings, were all super close?
We're close. My earliest memories is sleeping in bed with mom, which I'm sure we'll get to, and also sharing a room with Shauna.
Mm,
So she was 10 years older than me. And I was like, I don't ever remember sleeping in my own bed in childhood. It
I
was
know. I used to snuggle with you too. Like you were like just popping around. Like,
from bed to bed,
yeah,
snuggling.
yeah. Yeah, and
And
that's why you snuggle all your babies like you do. By the way, my sister Robin has 8 kids. I probably already said that in the intro, but when Shauna took her life, you were pregnant with your first child. So she took her life in, my goodness, it'll be how many years ago this month? April, 2005. Yeah, 19 years. 19 years. It doesn't seem like that long ago. It's so alive for us still, wouldn't you say? It still lives in.
I 'cause I feel like I'm constantly still being led by her, so it doesn't yeah, it doesn't definitely doesn't feel but I'm able to keep track because I know I was pregnant with my oldest, so I easily just am able to keep track of it.
Yeah. Kennedy is like the embodiment of how long Shauna's been gone, really.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
So as I mentioned to our listeners, she had 5 children. She has 5 children. Her oldest was 11 at the time of her death. Her youngest was 2. And I think the thing, and I'll let you speak to that part of it, that what struck you the most or what devastated you the most. Shauna was 2 years younger than me, and um, it was really difficult for me to witness when she started having children how quickly the mental illness, accelerated. And there were so many times that I wanted to just save her and fix her and rescue. And I think for me, it was just a really big lesson. And you cannot fix, save, or heal anyone. All you can do is love them. And I know if she were alive today and she was part of this conversation, which she in some ways is, because she's such a part of us, she would have her own regrets as we have ours. And one of the markers, I think, of her life to me was just how deeply she did love and how open she was and how real she was. And so when she took her life, it was a defining moment for me in terms of the time I had 4 young children, and the youngest was 2 or 3. And I was just like, by the way, Shauna lived in the same town I did. Our children were very close in age. We saw each other all of the time. There was a lot she was holding back for me, but I could also see that she was really trying, just completed uh, a 90-day stay in a treatment facility for addiction. And her mode of uh, taking her life was to go to a hotel in Salt Lake City. She took a 90-day supply that her insurance had mailed to her of a drug that was used to manage her bipolar, and she overdosed. But before she did, she wrote a letter. She wrote a letter to her to the family. She wrote a letter to her husband. And in essence, the angst that she was really feeling, aside from just absolute hopelessness, was that she couldn't be the kind of mother that she wanted to be for her children, that she felt like she could be a better guardian angel than she could be a mother. That was one of the biggest things that stood out to me in her letter. So I remember after the funeral and after, it gets so intense that you kind of run on this really dark adrenaline. It's the only way I can put it. But like I don't know about you, Robin, but I just felt like someone had stuck an anchor on my chest, like on my heart chakra. And I just this there was just so much sorrow and heaviness. I wasn't angry. I felt like I spent a lot of my life just being angry at her for not being able to quote unquote get it together or see her worth and her gifts. But I remember, a couple of weeks after the funeral, I just went to her grave and I stood over it, and I promised her that I would be her voice. And I know you have felt similarly. You have felt that I mean, that was such a defining moment, I feel like, for all of us. But that's sort of my contextualizing around what moved me into going from more of like a Western remedial treatment model of like psychology into the path that I actually ended up moving into, which was more of a holistic mind body science kind of, alternative path. I want you to speak to, now that I've just talked for like 10 minutes, I would love for you, Robin, to share. And we, by the way, there's levity between us, but also know that we have spoken how many hundreds of times have we talked about? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is sort of the impetus of our work that you and I partnered in together later. But just know that, if there is levity, it's not to undermine or minimize the pain that we have felt. It was I can't even, absolute devastation, absolute devastation. So we've had space around it and it's been helpful for us to talk about it a lot. And that's been part of our path. But why don't you speak to what was going on with you during that time, and how you framed her passing and moved into the work that you were being called to do?
Yeah. So I think, you kind of talked about, I feel like I grew up in a totally different family than in the family you grew up with, right? Like I had different parents. I
Well, we had
had
to just let's speak. We had the
same
same parents,
parents, same parents,
but
but
yeah, they were older
they
when.
were, they matured immense. I mean, a 10-year between, Shauna, you and Tanya with Bryce, Ryan, and me. It was like,
Right.
and I think even, so I was the baby of the family, but then our aunt, our father's sister took her life and left behind her son for our parents to raise. So our little brother is our biological cousin. So
And that happened when you were 10 and I was
that happened when
20.
I was 8. That happened when I was
Oh,
8
okay.
or 9. I
No,
think I was,
because I was 21 because I was getting ready to go on a
oh, that's
mission.
right.
Yeah.
Got Dusty when I was 8. And then, yeah, he
Right.
was
We
living.
had him for a bit before we adopted him. Yeah.
So I just remember, like, I was so young and I was so confused by the whole concept of suicide. And I just remember there were, I went from being the baby of the family to now having a little brother. It just shifted so many dynamics in my life.
Mm.
Uh, and, also me growing up, me being the last child, the child number 6 in the family, and mom having sort of, I feel, having postpartum with every child. And
But
by the time
especially you by the time you came along. Yeah.
I came along, I certainly didn't know this obviously at the time, but looking back, I recognize like, wow, the first 5 years of my life, I was in bed with mom. Like that's like so many of, I still have like her bedroom in my mind's eye of me laying on bed and the whole scale of like the ceiling, her bathroom, like all of that, and just being nuzzled up next to her. So, that all swirly whirly in my mind as a child and not really having any positioning or context or place for that. And then as I am now coming and witnessing Shauna's, and I will say your journey too, and Tanya's of
Drama, USA.
the seeing that like the mental illness in our family play out as you guys became young adults. When you were raising your babies, I was still a teenager. So I, you know, was not like, now I recognize those things as like, wow, you guys were really suffering from depression and anxiety and postpartum, but I didn't understand what that, we did talk about it. It was
Yeah.
just, so by the time it came, at the time of and leading up to Shauna's death, I was a brand new newlywed. I got married the note that fall before the spring when she passed, and it was like the happiest time in my life.
Mm.
And
Married to a great guy, you're like
yes,
super beautiful and
not
get
you know
pregnant. Yeah.
sooner than we wanted, but um, I'm 5 months pregnant, and then this happened. And I remember even before we got the confirmation, I knew I knew she was gone. I didn't feel her on this earth.
Mm.
I just remember like grieving even before we all kind of met at your house, Cherie,
Yeah.
like waiting and
Dad was
wondering
calling our
us.
dad's a retired policeman, so he was, like, calling all the police departments to find out. Yeah.
And I just knew in the back of my mind, like, she's gone. I didn't feel urgency. I really just wanted to just find her, to find her. And so and then, like, I remember when dad got the call and he broke down, and we were all just in your living room. And the funny enough thing was, I really actually felt a lot of protection around me. And I feel because I was pregnant. I don't
Mm.
know what exactly that was, but I do remember kind of feeling removed from my body, to be quite honest.
Like, you had to disassociate. Yeah.
Like if I felt the full weight of it, and I had kind of already, like I said, grieved a little bit before even coming to your house, but that finalizing thing of like
Yeah.
gone, and realizing what she did. It was so too
Too
much. It
much.
was,
Like, you can't place it. You just what? Like,
yeah, and the enormity of the wave of so many emotions. It's not like it's, the typical like grieving process of like denial and anger. Like it was like all of that all at once on top of like immense like sadness, grief. I remember we were yelling and screaming and
yeah,
like it
and
was,
mom was, like, running around and comforting. She had so much peace. Do you remember that?
yes, she totally
She was
just
the
wasn't,
strong, like, she was feeling our pain.
yes.
She
And I
couldn't
know
attach to her own pain yet.
she was totally just thinking about our kids. She was not, did not go there yet. But
But
so
she
I,
also, like you, she felt Shauna was already like, she told dad because they were driving to our youngest brother's Marine graduation when they got the call that she was missing and turned around and started to drive back. So by the time mom and dad got to my place and we were all gathered, mom told me later that she knew.
yeah,
She already knew.
yeah. So then we get to just all the things around what you do for burial, which was also such a crazy, us
Well,
dressing body.
yeah, that piece of dressing her body, talk about disassociation. I'm really glad that mom journaled all of it and shared it with us because there's so much that I just completely stuffed and blocked from my memory and awareness.
I just remember coming into the room and like, there's something so weird about when someone's gone, and but then when you're coming and you're seeing their body, and even though they're not really there, it's such an out of this world experience to see that and to know that they're not there, but you're seeing the sister that you
Yeah.
love. You're seeing like just the finality of it. And then it was, yeah, just, and also I think, yeah, a lot of disassociating. I remember I had a hard time
You were the
touching.
one, yeah, you were the one that like mom and Tanya and I, and you just kind of hung back and watched. And then at the end, mom had said to you, Robin, you're going to regret it if you don't do something. Cause I was like doing her hair and
Yeah,
um, I was putting her earrings in and different things. And Tanya was, I don't remember, but we were all super hands on. And you were just kind of like, I can't, you were like, I can't, mom. And then
yeah,
finally you did, you mustered to put
yeah.
her slippers on. Hmm.
Hers on. And I also do remember though, like in the speaking of like our family has such a like a sense of humor. We all do. Like
Yeah.
we bond on our humor and we are laughing always. And all, Shauna had just this total like operatic laugh is the only way I know
Well,
how to
she was an
describe.
opera singer, let's be honest. She was an actual singer.
It was so fun and fun loving. And I do distinctly remember feeling her trying to make levity of this.
Totally,
Like it was like, "Oh, don't I look great?" Or it was like kind of
totally.
like self-deprecate, like her humor,
That
and it was,
actually is what opened me up. I don't know if you remember that, but I was like you, and then finally I started to feel her humor, like you said, her realness, her down to earthness,
yeah,
and that was like, oh yeah, she's here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that did give me comfort, and it was just like, "Okay." And then, fast forwarding to graveside, and, I this is where, again, it was, I'm there, but I'm not there,
Yeah.
and, um, I do, though, remember them getting ready to lower her down. And it was like the last goodbyes, like, and all the flowers were on there. And I remember us all kind of gathering around. And I'm sure there was some sort of graveside prayer. I don't remember that really, but like, I just remember it was kind of coming to like saying, like, and I remember having, I just remember being so present to like the baby in my belly.
Hmm.
And I remember, like, I
Wait,
knew
how
it
far along were you? You were like 6 months along, right?
5 months, so I knew it was a girl,
All right.
and I remember, like, all the lines started coming together as far as, like, "Oh my gosh," like, mom, well, postpartum, her mom, our great-grandmother postpartum, like, how long was she in bed for? Like, and now Shauna, where that catalyst was
Heart
really
problems as well. Heart failure, heart problems. Yeah. Sadness,
and
deep grief.
here I am, and I'm carrying a girl, and I just remember feeling like, "Oh my gosh, like, I could get this disease," honestly, is what I looked at it as like, as soon as I have a baby, I could get this postpartum disease, like,
Hmm.
and it could kill me. I remember thinking that, like, "This could kill me," and then I was, again, just, like, ever present to this baby, and it was, like, my first mama bear, like, "Ugh," and
Yeah.
I'm like, "No." I
No.
remember distinctly, like, "No, I am not passing this on. It is stopping here. This stops here. This is stopping here." Like,
Yeah.
and it was like everything. Shauna's death at that point was my purpose birth. Like,
Yeah.
that was,
Yeah. It's a good way to look at it. It was like a death rebirth.
it totally was. And I also felt Shauna's like, "Yes, like,
Mhm.
yes, like, do that. Go,"
I also think it's important to say here too that we also felt her saying yes, but we also felt her deep regret. It's not like
Yes.
like she didn't really want
Wasn't in the
to.
crusading mode then. It was,
No,
you
it was very like, what did I do?
Yes.
We
Yeah.
felt that energy. So let's be clear with that, you know.
But
Um,
it was this glimmer. I just remember it was like my one ray of sunshine in like the darkest point of my life,
mm,
that it was just like I felt like, okay, like, and it, like, we did not waste time. I remember coming away from that, and like,
now what do we
me,
do?
Tanya, mom, like, we were like, "Hell no." Like,
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
we, and very closely, I remember after also Tanya telling us, like, she beat me to it.
Yeah,
I had
she
a
said that actually at the house. I'm glad you brought that up because when mom was going around comforting all of us when dad had just told us that they'd found her body, the Salt Lake City Police Department had gone and found where she had checked in under her name, got in there, had found her, told dad. It wasn't that much longer after that was revealed that Tanya turned to us and said she beat me to it. So my older sister Tanya, she and I are actually only just barely a year apart. She was, and we should also mention too, Robin, that both of our sisters were on over a dozen different medications to manage their bipolar and the side effects. Um, and so Tanya
year
actually had, sorry?
for years and years
Or
they were
yes,
on.
they were not in the driver's seat, right? And they're both high creatives. That's another mile marker, I guess, in our family of like melancholy and high creativity and things and bipolar. But I remember when Tanya said that, I could also feel in her what you just brought up, which is no,
Yeah.
because
Yeah, I
she
remember
saw what it did to us. Yeah.
her
Yeah.
promising right then and there, like, I will never do this to you guys. Like, it was a gift for her to see the
Yes.
actual aftermath of
Mhm.
what that decision would do to the
Mhm.
family. And so, yeah,
And I
she,
also need to say too that Tanya had some childhood trauma that I didn't have or that Shauna didn't have. There were a lot of complexities to what was happening with her biochemistry and her trauma, that she was actually misdiagnosed with bipolar and heavily medicated rather than them looking, same with Shauna, rather than them looking at the core wounds. And it was just a lot of symptom management. There was lack of sleep, there were all these things. And I actually, just to back up a little bit too, that I just remembered, I was working in an addiction recovery center as a group counselor, and at the time that Shauna was in an addiction recovery center just down the road from where I was working. And so it was already up for me, because we do have a preponderance for addiction in our family history as well. Um, and so it was already up for me. Like, I really think that there's something going on that we're not really like. I worked at a psychiatric hospital, I worked at this addiction recovery center, and I worked at different behavioral centers. And I could just see all they were doing was talk therapy and medication for the most part. Now, again, this is, 19 years ago, but still, it hasn't changed a whole lot since then. And we could see that, but
yeah,
we didn't know another way. We we didn't understand that wholeness model that we do now. And so, yeah, so continue with what you were saying. But I just wanted to interject that Tanya was trying to fight for her life and was ready to give up. And then
mhm,
this happened with Shauna.
yeah.
And then it was like, oh, plan B.
And I just remember feeling like all of us really yoked to each other in this cause.
Mhm.
Like we're not going to lose another family member to this. Like this is done,
Right.
like whatever it takes. Like that was the thing. I just remember like whatever it takes, I'm going to find other things than what my sister was given because Shauna tried everything under the sun.
She really
So
did.
many different types like from shock therapy,
Electroconvulsive shock therapy. Yeah, just
medications to rehab to like everything and
every
self
treatment.
obviously as well. And so I just remember leaving that like just really like I really felt God's love and I felt like yeah, I have not left you empty-handed is kind of just what I just knew there were things out there and that's what became my purpose. It was just to find those options, to find the better options.
And you were
So
already kind of in the holistic space because you were
yeah,
a massage therapist.
I think that does play a role. Like I remember I was also going to go to school for psychology. Like I think everyone in our family comes in with your family, like, that's where you go. So I remember I was like I was enrolled to go to University of Utah for the psych, and I had a boyfriend at the time who was going to massage school. And I remember having a huge migraine. And he was like, hey, let me try this, acupressure technique. And I was like, really skeptical about it. I was like, don't you just have like some ibuprofen or whatever? But he was learning it and he's like, can I just practice it? So he did this like acupressure technique and my head, it totally went away within like less than a minute. And it was a shock through my system because it was like, that is the route I knew I needed to take was more in the somatic
Yeah.
uh, approach, more body, like the holistic approach. I was not to go down that allopathic route of psychology. Like it really was to open that up. So I like literally that next month I enrolled in his same massage school program. Like total about face did
Really
that.
sad note. Didn't he take his life later
No, he was an addict and he died from that
from his
ultimately.
addiction?
Yeah. So So I was kind of, yeah. So, and that was like pretty close out of, I did like a couple semesters of college, but I really about faced and went down natural medicine and alternative medicine. And I'm so glad that I did because that's just where I haven't stopped. Um, and really, I think getting into more of that mind body
Yeah.
connection. So it was like once I got the foundations of like, um, what I learned with how the body works with massage school and I learned about emotion code. I got all of these, I just
We just
got
couldn't
all
get
these
enough. It was like Mom and Tanya and you and I, we were just
eating
sponges.
up,
Like
just
the weirdest stuff too. Some of
like
it we had to weed through, but here's what's powerful about what was going
opening
on.
us up. Like
It's yeah, because it was like you were saying, we prayed and we felt there was something bigger happening with our mission, and that she was in some ways, I guess you could say, kind of a sacrificial lamb in the sense that all of these family generational things just congealed in her, from her heart to her back to her mind and all of these things. Um, and so it was very telling that, as I look back now in retrospect, right, everything was being divinely set up. And I remember, like praying and declaring actually in a microphone at a suicide rally. The cycle of suicide stops here. The Deseret News printed it. I was Mrs. Utah at the time. I didn't know what I was saying. I just knew that it had to stop. I didn't know how. But the most powerful piece of this, I think, Robin, what we did, you, me, Mom, and Tanya, is we just opened our minds. We were like, we don't care how weird. We have the discernment. We can filter through. And this is really, it was after her death that I started learning about um, quantum healing, energy psychology. Um, I was just so fascinated by it because it just seemed to make sense to me that we hold the energy in our bodies. And as you know, as a massage therapist, we don't like, I was just taught it was all kind of in your mind, like all of your brain is kind of the command center and it's just like processing all of your emotions. But as you and I both know now, emotions are processed through the entire body. And when we started talking about that in 2000, mid 2000s, everybody looked at us literally like we needed to be committed to, and this, like just
it was
looking at us like, what are you? Now it's common knowledge.
have something as big as what happened to us. It forces you to think outside of your norm. Like it forces you to be open because
Yeah.
that clearly didn't work. Like, so I would say that was the catalyst to so many other decisions. Like, when we're talking in this context of like, okay, like what you were saying, Shuri, like all these things were set up for us to like what we're doing now. Like, I look at all of those things and, um, one of the biggest things that stands out to me, especially right after the time of Shauna's death, and I'm a new mom, and um, was how much looking at some of those alternative methods, like aromatherapy, for example, like we had heard about aromatherapy, but I would say what was available at the time wasn't, it was so loosely regulated. I would say we didn't like, because we were dabbling in
Yeah.
essential, but I would say like it wasn't so
It wasn't,
consistent results we were getting, or it wasn't like these like, wow, that was a really big, effect.
Mhm.
But we were starting to see, like, I was starting to look at what are the big heavy hitters when it comes to mind body medicine and different modalities and therapies. There was EMDR, there was EFT, there were, these other things that I was looking at. But I remember, um, you know, I, when essential oils really started coming to the forefront was when I, at this time now, had two babies. And I was starting to look at, I was just using them for medicinal, like for their, colic, for diaper
this
rash,
was like
for
also massage you were using like to calm the
infection.
nervous system. Yeah.
Yeah, like I just, I was like, oh, and but the but the brand that I found and was using, I was really like, I was actually seeing the results. So I was really pleased with that. And then I was using them on my clients. And I remember feeling like, oh, this is interesting. Like they're having like really faster results. And I was noticing a difference in my demeanor when I was massaging them with the oils. And then I remember going to a convention one year with you, Cherie.
This would have been like 2010.
Yep, 2010. And I, I don't know. For whatever reason, like I feel like that was completely designed for us. I just want to like think that way because it was like you had these
Well, Tanya and Mom were with us too. We were all
yeah,
sitting at a
there
table
were
and we were
but the
taking notes furiously.
doctors talking about it.
Yeah.
There's scientists, these addiction recovery centers, and they were just really hitting home the whole limbic system and the olfactory system and how the oils are such a quick, like quickening agent basically for getting in there. And so I just remember so distinctly, like I remember the information coming in and it was like my body though was reacting so much to what was happening that it was hard for me to keep up with the info because I was just like, it was like a clear, this is what you've been waiting for. This is what
Yeah.
you've been waiting.
Well, and
Like,
there was a lady that got up and started talking about her experience, and it was almost like Shauna.
yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then I remember looking over at you and I'm like sobbing, you're sobbing,
Mom and
and
Tanya are like holding it together, sobbing. Yeah.
it was
It was
just it
bigger than what she was sharing. It was, and this is something, this is a big thing that I see with a lot of people that I've worked with who are wanting to know their purpose. So they're wanting to feel into their calling, and calling and a purpose are different. And I remember learning from, I think it was John Maxwell. He's like, a mission or a purpose is something you want to do. A calling is something you have to do.
yeah.
So I think our emotional catharsis at that time was also an indicator that there's something bigger going on here, that the reason that you're sitting in this chair is that you're feeling this because it's part of your path to not just learn about it, but we would end up teaching it. We would end up taking this baton. Not Mom and Tanya didn't really follow suit, but for whatever reason, you and I looked at each other with this
It was just like
knowing.
it's like our souls did a handshake at that
Well, we
point.
literally did like a sister pinky, like,
Yeah.
we're
Like
gonna
let's
teach this.
but I will say, Sheree, like there was also enormous resistance for us. Like I'm loving that you're saying a calling because I remember it was like I got so clearly and distinctly the voice came in that was like, you can continue to do the work that you're doing and affect dozens of people. Because I had, and that's how many people, like every week I could only really work with a dozen people every week.
Yeah.
I was a
You
mom
only have
of two,
so much capacity to work one-on-one with people. Yeah.
and it was like you can continue to do the work that you're doing, or you can affect thousands.
Mhm.
And I didn't grasp that. I didn't really know what that, but I know that I resisted because this whole package came in a network marketing company.
Yeah.
And for you
And let's
and
just say it's doTERRA essential oils. We were there from the very beginning. We were in the circles of people who were just like I said, we were kind of divinely planted into the culture and the places where this was originating and moving through and becoming a thing. And we weren't sure. We
it
sat
was
on
just
it
not
for
the
2 years and just
package,
used the
neither of us.
oils. Like we were like, this is not what we want to do. We don't want to
Honestly,
be
like
the network marketing
I want
sister
to
people,
preface where we're living. Like Utah's like a network marketing like
like Mecca.
of the world. And there's so many companies that come. You and I would get hit up all the time to all these parties for this makeup, this purse, this clothing, this face care, whatever. And it
I
was
still
all
do. I still get hit up. Just as a
yeah,
side note, I think everybody does. But no,
huge.
this was more for us putting the business model aside.
Yeah.
It was very, very heart-based of like, we want, number one, to break these family patterns.
Yeah.
Number two, we want to teach, because I had also had a parallel experience with one of my children right before we were sitting in that setting and feeling the spirit and chills and sister pact, that we were not gonna, I had had my son, Noah, and he's okay with me sharing this, but he had a very pronounced, and he was, oh, how old was he? 12 or 13. He's 27 now. Um,
Yeah.
but he had a very pronounced issue, and I actually doubled down and resisted. Well, he was put on a medication that had really horrible side effects, and so I doubled down and used all of the training and tools of what I was using in the holistic realm, including essential oils and mind body science and meditation and just a lot of like earthing and grounding and all the things that I never learned getting my psych degree, by the way. And I was taking him to a psychologist and a psychiatrist. And when he literally the month before we were sitting in those chairs, he had such a pronounced breakthrough that his psychiatrist was taking notes from me and asking me what I did. And I think and I just need to say this too, that like when Noah and I left, oh, and he goes, "Oh, that medication's working really well." And I'm like, "Well, I stopped him." And he's like, "What?" So anyway, so Noah and I are like celebrating with the psychiatrist. We walk out. He's never been back for that particular issue. And it's interesting that he turned to me and he said, "Mom, you should share this with other moms." And it was the same thing with you when I was locking eyes with you, in the next month, I got these chill bumps through my whole body, like a visceral response out of the mouth of babes. And I was like, yeah, why wouldn't I? If you had this kind of a breakthrough, let's just say, why would like, I love to teach anyway and talk, but why wouldn't I share that? Why would I keep that to myself? Right. So all these things kept happening to
Well,
the
and then with
point. Yeah, with
then
Tanya. Yeah, you want to speak to that. That was powerful.
first leaving that convention and we were like, okay, Tanya, I would also say like I was on a mission. Like if you even looked sad, I was throwing oils. I just wanted to like, I learned that, but I was going to make sure
So
and put it in.
passionate. Yeah.
It's like, this really work? Like they say, like we've been using them medicinally, but we're like connecting those dots of like for the emotionality of this, for
Which we
like,
didn't know was actually an ancient science. It's an
no,
actual lineage, it's an actual therapeutic technology that was used in ancient times that grows in the earth. And so it wasn't it was new to us,
yeah.
right?
We all heard of aromatherapy, but it's so
But it's
loosely,
more than aroma. It's more
yeah,
than aroma.
and it was really getting into again what was learning with mind body medicine. It was just like the perfect fit. And so I just remember leaving that convention and you and I just being like, okay, like let's like it was like boots on the ground. Like
Yeah.
we were not only like out to prove like for sure if this could really work at the level that
Hmm.
we felt that it could, but we were on a mission that if it did, we would tell the world.
Yeah.
And I remember Tanya, telling us like, guys, I don't know how long it was after that. I want to say within a year of her being able to whittle down all of her medications. She was working with her doctor and they were able to wean her off of almost
Which
all
is
of her
which is when
medication.
she had her diagnosis rescinded. It was like these medications are actually exacerbating the bipolar diagnosis. And when she weaned off of them and got stabilized and used natural tools and did different things, she actually was herself again. And she didn't exhibit those same, she didn't fit
Yeah.
the criteria, the diagnostic criteria.
Yes. And I just remember her like contributing so much of that to oils and teaching us like, yeah, when I'm feeling anxious, this is what I'm grabbing and keeping in
Yeah.
my purse. And this is what, and so it was just like, that was happening simultaneously as we're like literally sharing this,
We just we
was
just
just
put
not,
a backpack on and we just started. I remember you had babies like I did.
I
Like
was
you
going
were
to
putting like
Japan,
like
holding
a
a baby.
baby carrier while you were
Yes.
teaching classes. Yeah.
Yes.
This is an important piece because number one, I just want to say that we're not promoting a catch-all fix that we're just sharing our story. We're just sharing what found us. And it was the mechanism that was leading us to what was calling us.
Yeah.
And it always finds you, right? And me too, in the most inconvenient times, right? Um, we were not just, let's be honest, we were not just searching for answers for health. We
Mm-mm.
wanted opportunities for our families to thrive and have some of the things that we didn't have in terms of opportunities,
Yep.
travel, connection to humanity, humanitarian service. Like we were mission driven there as well. We just didn't make the connection that our soul calling was going to produce abundance and prosperity. That wasn't
Yeah.
even like that was a
Yeah.
nice side benefit, right? But when we caught that vision, yeah.
It wasn't the driving force, and I would say, like, it certainly was, um, like, one of the other things in the back of my mind as I was teaching all over was, like, this would be really cool if my husband could be home with me so I could do more of this and he could do this with me. I do remember that being
Mhm.
also at the forefront, and so it was within a year, we were making a six-figure income
Exactly 1 year later, yes, which
doing
was unexpected.
was totally unexpected, flabbergasted everyone, including us. And that's when it really clicked. Like, oh, I get it.
Hey, just a little break here to remind you of what I alluded to in the intro, which is that Robin and I are doing a free 2 hour webinar on April 24th from 10 a.m. to noon. And it is called A Pathway to Regenerative Income Through Feminine-Based Business Principles. We're going deeper than we did in this episode. We're going to talk about restorative practices to claim prosperity and abundance the feminine way by raising your frequency so that you become more magnetic in order to attract what you truly want and to answer a hell yes to your soul calling and some of the pitfalls and learning curves that Robin and I have experienced the last decade and a half of growing our businesses internationally. So we'd love to have you. Again, that link is in the show notes to register for A Pathway to Regenerative Income Through Feminine-Based Business Principles. Hope you can join us. But let's back up too. Like we just skipped over a whole year of literal hell working through our issues. Okay. We had to bust through issues about money. We had to bust through issues about what is this woman doing? She's a mom and she's traveling and she has young kids. We had to buzz through just our own reticence and our own
A network marketing
that it was a
business.
network marketing business model, which we now have reframed as more of like relationship marketing and team building and leadership development. But
We
at
had
the
to push
time,
through so much
so much
conditioning.
stigma and just we were showing up anyway. And
Also, this was also at the time where, like, people that were using essential oils were like, just like your crazy aunt, or like
well, there were people giving it a bad rap because there were other companies that were making really outrageous health claims with it.
such
Yeah.
bad stigma attached to it. And then us talking about the emotional aspects, that was, I will say, we were really pioneering that because
Like I
there was
said, people were looking at us like we were from Mars.
yes,
We were like,
yes,
"Did you know that you hold emotion in your liver? Did you know that?" And we were saying all these things because we were doing the research. We were reading Molecules of Emotion. We were looking into the mind body science. We were starting to formulate our
biology,
own.
yep,
Yeah.
all
And it was starting to make its way into more of a mainstream thought, I think, but we were still kind of those pioneers,
yeah,
where even doTERRA wasn't talking about that, but we were. We
yes,
were diving in. We were collaborating with other leaders and teachers and educators and people that had been in these fields like psychotherapy. Like you and I went into addiction recovery centers and we did beta trials. Like we really put boots to the ground because
yeah.
we wanted
And
people who
experiential evidence. We
we
created a
had, we
lot of
had,
that
mhm.
experiential evidence. So it was like, we didn't, I remember, like, I didn't understand a lot, even what we know now, Sheree, because we
We've
have
had to catch
constant,
up. We were just going on our intuition a lot of the time too. We just, yeah.
but it was so fascinating to just see the breakthroughs people were having. I mean, literally people who were not getting out of bed, people who were suicidal, people who were like and to see how this was shifting them, like to actually see evidence of, like, I was feeling this way, and there was the spectrum, right? It was like really deep,
Yeah.
mood, like someone
But
just having
it wasn't just, let's just be clear too. There were a lot of indicators for the biochemistry to get regulated, for the nervous system to calm. It wasn't just the oils, it was nutrition. It was nutritional science. It was breathing. It was meditation. It was still point. It was getting rid of the toxins in your home. Like there were all these moving pieces to it. Hmm.
Yeah. Yes. And so, but it was like we were talking about those things. We were talking about like again, my mission was to provide options for people. And that's what I really just saw the oils being, were just like a tremendous option um, to help with that. And so um, I remember, I remember it coming to the point where um, you and I were really,
Well,
it
we
was,
exploded. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but we had no idea that that this would go international. We within a year and a half, we were in Asia. I ended up being in Australia. Like we were in multiple countries. Like this just took on. I mean, we worked hard, but like we were very intentional. Looking back, don't you think, as you look at it now, like how intentional and intuitive we had to be, which
it was
is
like blinders. We didn't, it was just like, it was
just
just
it's going to
so,
happen. Like we are going to, yeah. Like, and I have to say, if I hadn't had you with me in that process, it would have been really hard. I think when people start an entrepreneurial pursuit, they feel like they're a solopreneur, but no one ever is a solopreneur, right?
Mhm.
If you can choose to partner or link arms with someone and create a movement in whatever mechanism and whatever vehicle that you decide to do, and you have someone you love and trust with you, I think that was part of our magic that doTERRA put us on stages a lot of the times together. We spoke at convention, I think, 1 or 2 years after we had, that awakening kind of experience. And it was really beautiful. It's now been beautiful to see the metamorphosis of the company. Now there's like multiple, it's like $1 billion+ company, and there's like multiple millions of members. But at the time, when we felt the call and we were positioned there and we were saying yes to teach and we were saying yes to our calling, we had no idea. We just, you
There was
know,
no
it
resources.
was
There was
just
what
what
I think I do want to speak to the fact that like once we got to that point, there's a certain level where it's like I feel like I feel like we were just pulled forward, like we were just like doing that, and then it got, there's this point where we were getting to burnout, and it was
totally.
because we were, now we had like a six-figure business, we were
We had
managing on
thousands of people on our team and we're like,
top of
uh,
all of everything. We had no systems in place. Um, and I remember, there were quite a few years of us trying to navigate, like trying to now, it was like we stepped out of our realm of like what we just intuitively knew and flowed, like what we did in our first year of really doing that. And we went into patriarchal systems is the best way to put it. Like
yeah.
just like pushing through, like get her done.
It
And
was so like paradox.
to do it that way too,
Well, it was ironic because we went through a season where we were exhausting ourselves and making ourselves sick because we were trying to meet the needs of everyone, including our families and our businesses. And it got to the point where we were like, laugh. I remember you and I had a call where we're like, have you been taking your supplements? No. Have you been doing your oils and your deep? No. Oh my gosh. Like we are totally being hypocrites. We're not
well,
walking our talk.
and this is really where, I want to talk about like the mother guilt wound. Like
Huge.
this is, it wasn't till like, we're at that income bracket and we're like realizing, oh, this is not sustainable. Like like we were still doing so many things at home for our like we were not calling in the support
Because we
that we,
believed that we would be less of a mother or a woman or a wife or whatever if we did call in that support. Because what does that say about us? We're not pulling our weight as a woman, as a mom. Yeah. There was a
yeah,
lot of struggle with that
conditioning of just like, oh my gosh, like if I hire a cleaning person, my children are not going to learn the value of cleaning and they're going to be ruined. And if I am not the one making the meals for my family, then they're going to they're going to think I'm not a nurturing mother like my mother was, like all of these things. Like if I really asked for the support that I knew I needed to be able to now run a
Yeah.
multi-figure business, and with the amount of kids that I had, like I knew I needed support. I did genuinely not know how to ask for it or felt worthy to ask for it, because I felt like it would make, like, I really did feel like I am, this all goes back to what my definition of a good mom was, which was, modeled to me by a mother I had that, literally sewed our clothes, made our meals from scratch, um, just lived and died
Well, a
in,
lot of that, Robin, was because we didn't have resources. We were in poverty. And
but do
I
you see
think that,
how it can
well,
take
I locked that in.
your
Uh,
brain?
yeah, I locked that in pretty young when I I remember when I was in like fourth and fifth grade, my mom would get me up at 5 in the morning to deliver newspapers with her. And there was a season where she took me to clean high school bathroom, the bathrooms at the local high school at night. And to speak to that a little bit, because you brought up the mother wound, and we happen to have a mom who is extremely brilliant, high creative. Like she has suffered from depression. We've seen that cycling. But she would always say things to us like, I can't wait to see what you girls create in the world, not just, in your church community or your homes or, your main communities or whatever. It was like, I can't wait to see what you guys create in the world. And we got that programming from her, even though that wasn't what we would get from the patriarchy.
Yeah,
Right. And
yeah.
so I remember, what year did grandma die? Grandma ended. It probably would have been around
2014.
2016, or I think it was 2014. That was the year Emma was born. That's right. But I remember I was on stage speaking at doTERRA Leadership to women on managing being a mom and growing a business, like being successful, whatever that means, in both arenas and how you do that. And we had just gotten word that grandma Enid had just passed away, our mom's mom. And I was super close to her most all of my life. And she was just like you described our mom. She did it all. She was the consummate housekeeper, epic, like,
Yeah.
very feisty too. But anyway, I remember having this moment, like being on stage, just learning grandma had passed away. And I'm sitting here talking about how my mom took me on paper routes and how we lived with this kind of poverty consciousness in a way. And also thinking that grandma couldn't, even if she had gotten the call we did, there was absolutely no way, even our mom, right? Circumstances were set up in their lives that it just, for their generations, it just was not feasible. And so you remember this, we would go talk to grandma and she would just be in awe of what we were doing. She could, like, not judging us.
Too. She
She
wanted
what?
to know. She would want to hear it. She would want to
Oh
hear
yeah. It
we're doing.
like it was entertainment for her. It was filling her up. And there was no like, oh, don't you guys have young kids? Or why is your husband staying home? And why are the roles reversed? And she was just absolutely um pleasantly shocked, I would say. And so I think that's beautiful because I want to speak to like a little bit of this, even though you and I have had to like break through this poverty consciousness and this fight for having more opportunities, I guess, for our posterity. There was also, you and I hit a stage where when we started to grow our businesses, that we were not just working with women and mentoring women, but their husbands would come in. And there was a different dynamic. um, some husbands were really supportive of their wives doing, you know, growing her business. And then there were some who literally thought we were Satan incarnate taking their wife away from the home.
And it was a very threatening. Yeah,
Yeah.
we were threatening the the ecosystem of their household.
Even
Like
though they
that's
knew their wife was being lit up, that their income was increasing, that she was getting healthier, there's a point when you start a business of a wobble, like an imbalance, like chaos, really, that always
yeah.
precedes creation, right? It's messy. And so they'd start to see a little bit of messiness because mom's now doing a different thing, right? And they would say, see, it's wrong. It's creating mess in our home.
Yeah.
Instead of allowing this, metamorphosis of something that new that wants to be birthed or something that wants to evolve. And so we became, in a lot of respects, the villain because we were the one coaching the woman and the wife. And she's stepping into her power and she's owning her gifts and they were like, I don't know what to do with this.
But I felt like there was also I could notice a distinction between those women who like really stepped into it. There was no the women that I saw that were just like there was no room for question, like they just stepped into it and it was not asking for permission of it. It was not a um there was a difference between those that I felt like they did everything to pick, to like be worthy of being able to do this. So like they like
They
weren't letting anything,
overcompensated. Yeah.
they
Mm.
were, almost apologetic with their kids and their husband. And that just created more resentment, I found, with their kids and their husband when she did have to leave. Or versus like when it was just like when they spoke life into their business to their family, like,
Mhm.
this is what I'm doing. I'm loving it. This is what is lighting me up. This is what, like, that's where I
Yeah,
felt a real difference in
totally.
how those dynamics shaked out. Because when I showed up in the sense of like for the woman as like her, like the savior to kind of help back her up and like, speak to my husband and help him see how good this was, that never worked out
Right.
versus them.
And empowering her to advocate for herself to her husband. Yeah. It's like you're only reflecting back to that person you're mentoring what they want, what they told you they wanted. And they can't always advocate for that in some partnerships, but they could advocate for us. They could tell us, but they didn't feel that safety. And I would say that was probably not the norm. I would say most of the time the husband's like, you go, girl, this is great. Another thing that you and I both noticed is that when we started teaching classes and our classes were sometimes small and sometimes they were huge and sometimes we were on stage in front of thousands, but men would just study us like,
It did.
there is a woman teaching me something. And I'm, at the risk of not, I'm making a very generalized statement. I'm making a very blanket statement, but there were some men, you could feel it.
Some that had like you could point them out. They'd be in the audience, their arms would be crossed like this. There'd be kind of like a frown or sometimes like a question, like an inquisitive, like um and honestly, I got to the point I started calling it just skeptical husband syndrome. Like um I got to the point where I actually looked forward to it and challenged because their walls would come down.
Yeah.
But it was very interesting to see. Again, it was, you know, I'd like to think, part of what they feel their role in the family is protector and is right. And like, so when there's like this threat coming in that is again disrupting what
Totally.
what's
Wait, I
happening.
had a pretty good thing going in my house till you showed up and started talking about emotions. And it's like,
But then when they see when they're why, because the biggest thing that I have loved about this business is has really been the awakening that happens within the women. And when they actually see how that happening, they realize like, oh, I didn't know I wanted this until I'm seeing this happen.
I
Like,
didn't know what I
and
was missing. Yeah. Yeah.
gift it really was to the whole family and for the children to see their. I remember you and I talking about this on stage too of how your children do not want to be the reason, they don't want to be the
Mm-mm.
excuse why you're not
Yeah.
able to do this or want, and I know we both have seen that with our families and our children. Like, in fact, my oldest daughter, Kennedy, she's taking these college credits in high school and it's the family sciences,
Mm.
whatever curriculum and class. And I just remember how often she would come home and she'd be like, "You guys aren't even on the spectrum of a normal, typical, family dynamics." And she said, but she even recognizes like how, that disparity and what has been that cultural norm was not serving women. And she has seen that play out and has seen it by example of what I've done with it, that it's helped her. And she's brought that up in classes. And it's just so
Yeah.
great. It's so
Yeah.
great to see.
Yeah.
Um,
I love how one of the deepest things I've learned about being a mom, coming on 30 years of being a mom, is that your children, and I heard somebody say this before, but your children are watching the show, not listening to the lecture. They're seeing is, the greatest gift we offer our children is our own happiness and our own fulfillment, not the other way around. There's a season where you have to like breastfeed and be all with them and whatever. And there's a season for that where they're co-regulating their nervous system with you and whatever. But there comes a point where they can see or feel, more importantly, this disparity between you showing up and appearing to be happy or fulfilled or convincing yourself that you are, but yet there's a deep emptiness, and children feel that, and they feel the projection on them to fill themselves up. And so they then, and this isn't even conscious for them, but they start to like question, or what am I going to do when I'm a mom, or what am I going to do when I'm a parent, or you know to not feel this way or show up this way, and then they feel responsible for your pain, and it just becomes this mother martyr weird dynamic. My daughter Savannah, who was 10 when I started my business building adventures, is now getting her psychology degree. And just like you were talking about with Kennedy, she's got some fire around advocating for women, and not just having women be defined by their roles, but by who they are and how they move and live and breathe. And so we just don't know the repercussions generationally when we break that sort of mother martyr, or we break that you could say the patriarchal hold of the cultural, like what a woman should or should not do or whatever. And I also I also want to say too that, when you and I, we've been mentoring a lot of women over the years, and we've gotten to the point, I feel like, where we can tell when somebody's either like dipping their toe and sort of like feeling the water, even though they feel this calling, okay, even though it's rising in them and they're feeling yes, yes, yes. Um, there's resistance, not
mhm.
just of what we just spoke to, but their belief in themselves.
Yeah.
And so, like you're saying, the children, they don't want to be the reason. You can hide behind your children in a lot of ways and say, well, my child's having a hard time right now. And I'm not diminishing that, because sometimes you do have to I've taken huge pauses. Both you and I have adopted children and put our businesses on hold after this, after we had built these businesses. I'm not saying that. Yeah. I'm seeing like that resistance inside of like imposter syndrome, and not knowing if I have what it takes to see this through. And I've had all these patterns in the past of starting and stopping. And there's just so many things that can come up that they've associated with a woman standing in her power or sharing her truth or moving into humanity in a bigger space with her gifts. Like there's so much that can come up because of the programming from our culture. So as we kind of round this out with what we've learned, I think in a higher level now, because we've had what, like 14 years of doing this now, and we've seen a big learning curve. Um, I think one of the biggest things that I've learned, and I want to speak to the burnout, but aside from the burnout, one of of avoiding burnout and why I got into the burnout, but one of the biggest things I've learned is it's less important what you choose as your pathway, and more important in how you do it.
Yeah.
So if something's calling you and you're in resistance, you're saying no, 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 and it'll keep showing up in different, come cloaked in different forms. It'll keep trying to find you and find you. And then when you say yes, one of the best pieces of advice I got early on is start before you're ready, which flies in the face of like, oh, be prepared and whatever. But for me, I needed that advice that stuck
Yeah.
because I had this perfectionism going of like, I don't know enough. I don't know enough about holistic science and whatever. But I was being schooled in a higher way.
Yeah.
And so again, it matters less what you do as your mechanism. And it's more important how you're doing it, how you're showing up. Are you all in? Are you open? Are you teachable? Are you still learning and evolving and growing? Are you in it? I'm less concerned now with being a teacher as much as a guide and guiding
Right.
people back into their own knowing. So what would you say that you've seen as a major resistance for someone to be like, yep,
Yeah.
there's a yes they feel, but then they have to move to an action, and that's where the gap happens. I feel like there's like a little, you know, a little
Yeah.
space there.
I think, I mean, like you said, like we've been mentoring women for so long. And I think, and you were coaching before then. And then I started getting into coaching, a few years into doing this business. I was realizing how much I really loved moving women into that, like you said, guiding them to those breakthroughs, to those. And I think for me, like the biggest thing that I've noticed after all the coaching that I've done, inside the business and outside, like I have coached women who are, some of them were CEOs and owners of their businesses, and some are um, employees that are wanting to further their career. That whole spectrum. The biggest thing that I find is that they hit up to their belief systems about themselves.
Yeah,
And
the upper limit, like Gay Hendricks talks about in The Big Leap.
everyone reaches their different things at different points. And for some, when they get that, even though it's like they want to go through and they want their life to look different and they know and they're feeling called to do this, that unknownness, like really stepping into the unknown and really it's a lot scarier for people than it is to just fall back, even though they hate their current state. It's just
Yeah,
easy for them to fall back into what they know. At least they know what this feels like. At least they're like, per, you
there's a
know,
payoff. There's a payoff for staying in a certain frequency of comfort.
yeah.
And I think now on the earth, like, I mean, 14 years ago, yeah, but now the polarization, the uncertainty, like you're saying, the unknown, everything's
It's also the
ramping up.
I feel like because everyone is also like trauma has surfaced so much in the last few years, people's repressed trauma is coming up, like,
Yeah, generational stuff.
trauma that has been happening. There's I would say like a lower threshold of what people feel safe to step into the unknown with.
Yeah,
So for me, I feel like really regulating the nervous system is like key.
it's
Like
it. Mhm.
when this feels safe, when like I can regulate this terrain and have safety in my body, I can make bolder moves. I can be a
Mhm.
little more courageous. But if
Yeah,
I'm just grappling in survival and I am feeling like my nervous system is not like, how can anyone think that they can go and
yeah.
take
And
that?
you and I have partnered deeper with the emotional work over the years of, um, helping people with deep emotional release. We've become trauma informed. Like there's so much that's evolved for us in this work. And, you and I have partnered with a couple of other women to start a coaching certification for people to do deep release with essential oils and aromatherapy and visualization and declaration. And um, the take home for me, and this, as you were talking about nervous system regulation, this is what occurred to me. Like my research is focused on the senses and how they're portals of awakening, and there are feel good portals, but accessing them is really, really important, like accessing your senses so that you feel more alive. So that not only are you grounded and calm and not in fight or flight like you're talking about, but that you're actually coming into space of alignment with nature and the rhythms and cycles of nature. And that moves me into what we're, well, it's not in the total scope of this discussion, but you and I are doing a webinar on sort of what it means to have a regenerative business model, what it means to be embodied in the feminine way versus the masculine paradigm of go, go, go and push and set all these goals and check this off your list and all these things. We've lived we did that because that's all we had. We had sales trainings and different, and and I think you and I had even talked about before that I couldn't even use the word, okay, this is 2010. I couldn't even use the word business because I had a negative association with it. So I would tell people, I'm starting a movement or I'm starting a ministry. They're like, no, I'm not starting my own church. Like, I just couldn't say it's my business. And even the word sales, I had to replace that word because there was just so much charge around it with the masculine and the corporate and the, um, so much around like that patriarchal model of, you know, anyway. So I've evolved and come to peace with what I'm doing, and I've named it what I'm naming it. But the mechanism, like you said, we had the stigma of network marketing. And you and I both have other business outside of,
Yeah.
that, but just to ground people into like there's a different way to grow your business, no matter what mechanism or what path or what entrepreneurial path you take, or what business you want to start, or if you're already in a job you love, whatever. It's how do you anchor your senses? How do you ground your body? How do you calm your nervous system? How do you get clarity from your heart? All of these things, we didn't really start that way.
No. We really did learn through the last 14 years of ebbing and flowing into what that looks like. And I really do feel that there is a huge calling out that women are having of like, please help me know how I can truly grow a business alongside being a mother, because, or alongside um having relationships alongside, like, no one asks a man who, like, when they gets a new great job, like, who's taking, like, is this going to
Nobody
balance
ever
well?
says, "Hey, how are you going to balance your work and your career with your family?" Like,
But
but
that is
we got it.
asked of us. That's the inside inquiry happening all the time either
Yeah.
way. And so for me, like, really understanding that this is such a bespoke process for each one of us to
Mhm.
really find our own rhythm, to really but you have to explore it. Like, you
Yeah.
have
And I
to.
think that's where you and I, like, as I felt into some of our gifts, is we're kind of like activator people. Like, we just move to action and figure it out on the run. And I want to respect that there are some people who are wired a little bit more, they're a little bit more careful, and it's their gift. It's not a
Yeah.
weakness, it's their gift. Like, they really have to kind of see the overall view, and they have to zoom in and out, and they have to experiment and dip in and come back, and we've seen women evolve that way too. It's taken them a little bit longer, but I really respect that everyone has their own process for finding. Sometimes when you get a no, it's a not right now,
Yep.
and
Yep.
sometimes you get a yes, it's not a forever yes, it's a right now yes.
Yeah.
And so that's why I have moved less into like do it my way. I
Yeah.
mean, there's some universal principles that you and I both share that are going to work for everyone,
Yeah. There's
but
definitely our
you have to
sleeves we
respect.
share. But for the most part, like, let me say this too, like, with the emotional work and things that I've done with the oils, like in 2020, the therapists were coming to me and asking me how to use the oils with their clients, because they were, first of all, leaving in droves. They were so burnt out, these therapists, from, you have the pandemic, but then you have the
The
mental
fallout.
that happened after that. And I was so flabbergasted. And that's kind of what spew this coaching certification that you and I have done. But I'm saying that because these are people who have the tools and the skills, these therapists, right?
Yeah.
They didn't know, like, what to do to even to help themselves or help their clients, and they're seeing the value in a tangible tool in that way. And so I'm bringing that up because I feel like it's not just one thing. It's not just the tangible tools we'll be talking about. It's not just, you know, nervous system regulation. It's different for each person.
Yeah.
When you begin to have these options available to you and presented in a way that you can grab them in the way that works for you, this is where the magic happens. And this is where the breakthroughs are happening. And this is where women we're seeing and are attracting. I mean, now we have an 8-figure annual business, right?
Yeah.
Drawing eight
Yep.
figures a year. And I have hundreds of women on my team that are making 6 and 7
Yep.
figures. This is not where it's just us and we're like,
Well,
like
we've
the
seen the tree bear fruit. We've been in it for the long haul. We're not a flash in the pan, get rich quick. Like we've seen the sustainability of this. We've also seen the burnout part. And not only in health and in finances, by the way, like income and health, they're very related. Like why
yeah,
have wealth if you don't have health, et cetera. But we've seen this, evolution, I guess, of
cycles.
yeah, yeah, it's just, and there's always like there's another saying like new level, new devil, like it never ends, and there's, I think this belief that, once you hit a certain milestone that you've arrived, and that is not living, that is not growth, that is not expansion. And so you and I are still in the middle of this
We're in
evolution of it's
still
like,
discovery for ourselves. And I think what we're wanting to do is really lock arms with some other people that want to be in that discovery with us.
yeah,
And so what we're doing with this webinar is really showcasing like what a true regenerative business looks like
yeah,
in this frame of a doTERRA business. Because we have so many people asking us all the time. I get it a lot, especially like 8 kids. You have your 6-figure coaching business, and you have this business and your doTERRA. Like, how are you possibly doing this? And like, I know it goes into all the things we just talked about today. There is so much um, coming from that calling, your unique purpose, mixed with your unique blueprint for your own business model. Like
yeah.
that's what we're exploring. That's what we're
Mhm.
coming in. That's
We
what we're
Yeah, we've learned we bristle when we hear different rah-rah speeches about sales and different things because we've walked through that and we know what resonates, what's authentic, and what is not. We know that, like you said, with that restorative, regenerative business model, that there are feminine-based business principles that when you, which we wish we probably, actually, I don't regret that we didn't know this. Like, I'm glad I walked through that old masculine paradigm of crush it, kill it, pound it out, hustle culture stuff to get me to this place of like the attraction model, the magnetism, the feminine embodiment, the wisdom, the intuitive. Like you could either pick up the phone and call 200 people and have one person who is just like, oh my gosh, I've been waiting for you to call me and talk to me and help me with this. Or you could spend 15 minutes, pick up the phone and intuitively call the right person right out of the gate, right? But we weren't taught. So I don't regret the old way. It had a lot of value for me in learning, and I've assimilated a lot of that learning into what not to do. But I want to close with this, and then we can tell people where to go to our webinar. And by the way, we'll have all the details in the show notes for everyone. It's coming up on, what is it, April
24.
24th. Um, but I want to kind of round out with, how a woman, let's just say, can say yes. What does it look like to say yes to your soul calling? What is that? Like, what does that look like in your exterior world and in your interior world? How would you say?
A yes just feels like activation in my body. Like my body is just as compelled as my mind to move forward.
Mm. So like a full
Um,
body.
it's just I can't help but move towards it, right?
Mhm.
Yes, also feels scary sometimes because again, that unknown element and especially being more visible. I mean, we didn't even talk about that, but that's a
Oh, that was probably the biggest yeah,
whole especially
visibility.
that so for me, like an understanding like feminine leadership now, it's like it's just this is part of my human design too, like just my gut knows, like it's just a yes. And anytime I skirt around that or it clunks, it clanks, um and so that's the interior. The exterior world, what that looks like when it's a yes is flow. Like it's like, you know, a person. I remember when when we both said yes to DoTerra, even though again, it was like we so resisted it. And once it was like, okay, like we're all in, I remember having people literally come to my door, my
Yeah.
front door, and
Mhm.
saying, Katie Payne, if you're listening to this was her saying like verbatim the same things other people were just like, I don't know what you're doing, but I feel like I need to be a part of this. So it's just like the people started to
Yeah.
go, but it was only when the certainty was there and it was like, I'm moving forward. It's like the people start coming in, the ideas, like the creativity,
Mhm.
the, um, those points start to converge.
Yeah.
That's the way that I can say it.
I love that, and I would echo and say yes to all of what you're saying, and for me too, um, one of my teachers, Nithya Shanti from India, way back in 2013 or something like that, he showed me something that rocked my world, um, that it was a Venn diagram, and it was 4 circles, concentric, and then in the middle is the sweet spot, and here were the 4 circles. This is like what you know your soul calling is basically. Number 1, you're good at it. Number 2, the world needs it. Number 3, you love it. And number 4, you can get paid for it. So
Mm,
this is like high level vocation. This is like high life's work.
yeah.
And so for me, resting into, as I look at all things considered, what flows naturally to me in my gift sequence, my inborn gifts, you could say, what I haven't activated yet that I don't even know I have a gift in. My soul's bringing me that to that, right? And then like, yep, I can get paid for it. And there's a pathway for that. The world needs it. You and I could feel the need. I mean, like we said, it had been a divine setup. We had this family patterning. We had lost our sister and all our kids and all the things were going on. And we were like hungering for more knowledge, but we were also hungering to help people and to help our families and ourselves. Mostly we're all just trying to help ourselves. That's what's driving this whole dang thing. The whole ship is being driven by how we want to help ourselves. But then the other piece of it is that, when the world needs it and you're good at it and you love it and you're passionate about it and all these things converge, that is the magic. That like your soul would never lead you to something that you weren't totally adept at being able to, and you just haven't activated the gifts yet that are contained in that calling. But when you fully say yes, they start to come online. Parts of you come online, right? It doesn't mean
Yes.
there's going to be parts of it you don't like to do. There's going to be parts of it that are very uncomfortable that are stretching you. And so anyway, it's the process for me. It was I totally resonate with what you're saying. Like it's a full body, woo, yes. But then it's also like, and it means I have to do this, and that's hard and scary, and that doesn't make me light up. And that, that's like a burden. It feels like a burden. And that's actually where the growth can come in. Would you not agree?
Yeah. Yeah, that state of like when you get the yes, that doesn't stay like the whole
You're
way
not
through.
vibing the whole time on a like divine spark. No,
No,
it's
it's
valleys and
you are then start confronting your edges. You then start confronting your limits. And
yeah,
it's only when you're willing to bust through them
yeah.
that happens. So Yeah.
I just want to honor us, Robin, because we are first generation women in business in our family lines. We are first generation poverty consciousness breakers in terms of creating, income and opportunities for our families that way. Um, uh, our siblings are all amazing. That's not anything against her. They just have different pathways for their work. We have two brothers that are in alcohol recovery right now, who are doing their own work in their bodies. That's
Yep.
their calling right now. Our sister Tanya is recovering from a traumatic brain injury, but she has broken so many walls and so many patterns, and she's done so much work. So her path is a little different that way, and she's healing her body. Um, so so yeah, there's so much around saying yes and what that looks like and helping. I love to help women identify what a yes feels like in their body. You mentioned human design, you're studying that. I'm studying gene keys. I'm studying the four prime gifts that people come into this world with, and that fascinates me. And this is all part of what's going to go on in our webinar and what we're going to talk about with moving into that space of embodied feminine leadership. And we didn't even mention this, and maybe we can close with this, but that word leader for a
Yeah.
woman.
Yeah. It's a tricky one. That was not something I knew I was good at till I was a leader. And then I realized I think the definition of a leader for a woman could be much different than a leader for a man.
Mhm,
Um, and I recognized that truly when I rose up into leadership, when I um, and all for me, the definition of leadership for me was truly just being a light and a beacon. It was not telling people what to do and where to go. And
mhm.
it was simply showing up in my brilliance and doing exactly what I was lit up to do. That just automatically paved a way and a path for someone to follow. There
Yeah,
were certainly like is mentorship and, definitely things that I would recommend and, give direction. But I have loved and seen how many women that were like myself that had no idea that they had leadership in them until they were given the opportunity for it. And that's
yeah,
probably one of my very favorite things about this business was to recognize that leader in myself, but to truly help other women rise into leadership as well.
yeah. And even just being a mom is leadership, but it wasn't
Every
framed that way for us, and everything
ship.
is sales too. We're always trying to convince people of
Yes.
something because we want something, right? Or we wanna provide something yeah. It is semantics, it is epistemology, it is unlearning what we've learned and assimilated. But thank you, Robin, for this the directions we went in this conversation, and just for being who you are in my life and to others, shining so
I
bright.
best business partner ever.
Mm.